Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Housing Fair, Safe, and Affordable. My name is Pam Favreau. I'm the director of the CVOEO program, Vermont Tenants. And tonight we're going to talk about something a little different. For more than 30 years, Vermont Tenants has been known as a tenants' rights organization. And tonight we're going to officially throw our hat into the realm of providing education to landlords as well. To help me do this tonight, I have a couple of guests I want to introduce. This is Angela Zaikowski. She's the director of Vermont Apartment Owners Association and their educational wing, Vermont Apartment Owners Services. Hey, Angela, welcome.
Hi, Pam. Thank you for having me on.
You're on with me so often, I think I should just call you co-host instead of guest.
We'll get there soon, I think.
I think we will get there soon. And joining us tonight is a very special guest. This is Shaun Gilpin. Shaun is the Housing Policy Specialist for the Department of Housing and Community Development at Vermont's Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Shaun, your title is longer than the show. Welcome.
Thank you for that mouthful.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I was hoping to start tonight with what exactly does that mean that, you know, a program like Vermont Tenants is looking at helping to further the education of landlords? And I think the best way to start is to go back a little bit to the history of last year and last year's legislative session, and some new legislation that was put into action that we really supported and now have a role in. So I was kind of hoping you could start by explaining to our viewers kind of what that process looked like and what basically the new law is about.
Certainly. So thanks, Pam. As at the Department of Housing and Community Development, you know, we often hear pretty much every year we hear some sort of story from legislators who have heard from constituents, either landlords or tenants, who have had you know, a bad situation with a rental, whether it's you know, not understanding how to evict a tenant, or
right.
Tenants worried about you know, their landlord not following a warranty of habitability and other legal protections that we have in the state of Vermont. And this past legislative session, one of our legislators, I actually don't know who sponsored the bill originally, but it began as a standalone bill out of the House General Committee that really aimed to, and actually ended up mandating our department with coming up with an education program, and specifically tailored to those small-scale landlords that might not have the resources to hire an attorney, but are renting out either pieces of their home or part of a duplex that they might live in, or either you know, other landlords who have really relatively small holdings. And the goal of this whole project is to particularly to come up with some educational materials so that both landlords and tenants can sort of be on the same page and understand what their rights, their responsibilities are, and what steps they can take in order to make sure to maintain those. And the end goal obviously being a good, a safe, legal rental situation for everybody involved.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Angela?
Yes.
You're the expert on the landlord's side of all of this.
Yes.
Your organization actually provides education to landlords
right.
already.
Education and advocacy, yeah.
Yeah. Talk about, you know, kind of the perspective from the landlords, particularly the small ones, right. And why do we justify that the state, and I'll talk about it a little more later, a program like mine are going to make an effort to try to help provide them with an education?
Well, I think anytime you're talking about educating the population in general, it's good. Yeah. And one of the goals of this project is to provide education to not only landlords but tenants. We don't want there to be a mystery about either side's responsibilities under the law, what either side has the right to do or not do. And a lot of the educational materials that we're looking at developing are going to have information for landlords and information for tenants. So everybody's seeing the information that both sides are getting in one place. And for a lot of small landlords, there's not very many resources out there for them. There is you know, private associations like the one I run, but for some of them, even the membership fee to that is too much, or they don't think that they can afford it. And so even though the goal is to prepare these materials for small landlords, they're going to be usable by all landlords and all tenants.
Right.
And they will be beneficial.
Right, absolutely. And we've talked a lot together about kind of leveling the playing field by providing the same information to
Right.
both parties. So it makes perfect sense. There's a movement within the legislature to provide this. Yours is the state office that it would fall under your responsibility as a housing specialist, and your role in it makes perfect sense. So that leaves us with the question is, what's a program like Vermont Tenants doing in the middle of this? And you know, the thing I've been saying for a very long time, and that I keep saying to explain it, is we often say that, you know, this really, a renting relationship should be a business relationship and
Right.
not a contentious one.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of well-established belief about there being this huge power imbalance,
Right.
that the landlords have all the power and that the tenants have no power. And on the other side, the landlords think that the tenants have all the power because they can't even get them out when there's a reason to get them out.
Right.
And really, I've come to the belief that that power imbalance is an illusion. And it's an illusion that's fostered by lack of education. And it makes perfect sense to me that a well-educated landlord is actually a benefit to the tenants that I work with. Years of experience in running our hotline has just shown us again and again and again these small landlords that were, you know, they inherited their parents' house and it's a rental. The 80-something-year-old widows who, in the 50s, she and her husband bought a duplex to be able to afford to own a house, and now she's stuck with tenants that aren't paying the rent.
Right.
These are all low-income people as well. I
Or
mean,
you
they
have-
fit into our mission and our agency in
Right.
that they really can't.
Right.
You know, I spoke to an 86-year-old woman who was living completely on Social Security, and the income from the duplex, which was in the middle of nowhere, and it was $600 a month. She couldn't afford an attorney.
Right.
And so it really made me realize that even when I hear some of the worst horror stories about what you would call a bad landlord, I can really hear within it the fact that the landlord simply doesn't know
Right.
how to go about what they should or should not be doing.
Right. And I will say that there are bad actors on both sides, but for the most part, it's a lack of education
It really
from
is.
the landlord's perspective, particularly even if they're doing something that maybe isn't even in compliance with law. It's not because they're intentionally not complying with the law, it's
Right.
because they don't know what the law is or they don't know what they're supposed to be, what their responsibilities are under the
Right.
law.
Right. And I think having said that, I mean, none of us are oblivious to the fact that there will always be good and bad on both sides.
Right.
That there will be some landlords that we will never reach, or we may reach them, but we won't change them. It happens to be their personality and how they are. But in the same way, we've been doing tenant education for 30-plus years. And there are some tenants that don't do well as tenants, and
Right.
we can educate them till we're blue in the face, but they're making their own choices. But I think it's a smaller segment of the population. And I think the majority of people in our experience teaching tenants want to know. I get calls all the time from people who are considering becoming a landlord
Yep.
and wanting to know where to go for information to do it right.
Right.
And it just really dawned on us together when this opportunity came up. So the end result of a very long process became that our programs are the ones that are going to work with your department to put together a package of materials. And with some pretty explicit, detailed information on what we're going to cover. And I guess one of the things that has been really helpful to us in this process is being able to get feedback from the state. And so in the end, and the reason why we really wanted to be able to talk about this tonight is we've built in a system where this year, CVOEO and Vermont Tenants, with help and consultation from the Apartment Owners Association, are going to create educational materials. Some of them will be targeted specifically at small landlords. A lot of them will be good for both parties, landlords and tenants. But we've, at the encouragement of DHCD, created an open process where at every step during this process we have input. from different parties and had a go-to for that. And so one of the very first things we did was to come up with a stakeholders list. And so I was hoping maybe you could just talk a little bit about what DHC's motivation was to try to continually create it for bigger and bigger areas of input.
Certainly. So I think one of the major exciting points about this project is that it provides an opportunity for an awful lot of myth busting, and to put it one way.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to do was to really, I mean, we call it silo busting in our agency, but really break down the walls between different stakeholder groups that are involved at all sorts of different levels of the rental situation. So obviously you have your tenant and your landlord come to mind first when you're thinking about a rental situation, but there's a lot of other actors, particularly in bad situations, that also come into play. Your town health officer might be one. Police officers, unfortunately, often are involved in there. You have a court system. And so the idea of really hearing from all these different groups to understand better what sort of gaps there are in the information availability that's out there. Sort of what are people who are involved with the worst case scenarios seeing on the ground? What would they like to be known so that they don't have to act in the capacity of dealing with a poor rental situation?
Right. And
so, frankly, the more people that we can hear from the more different perspectives, in our view, the more likely we're going to have products, materials that can be really beneficial and make sure that frankly, resources don't have to be spent on a situation on the back end that could be dealt with on the front end, just with a better understanding and a better relationship with the whole situation.
Right, absolutely. I know that, I think we've all, certainly you, but we've spent enough time in Montpelier in the State House to hear that it's a common thing that you hear this cry from constituents who are property owners to go, it takes forever to evict a tenant, it takes forever to evict a tenant. And I've always just kind of sat back and said, well, not if you take the right steps in the right order. It can be a very quick process. And so, rather than saying, okay, let's go to the legislature and change the laws and make it easier, that's a huge process, taking up a lot of our legislature's time when there's a lot of important topics. So to us, it was very much like, well, wait a minute, teach them how to do it and do it that way. But it's not just teaching about eviction.
Well, and I think one of our goals is to try to educate people at the beginning of the relationship to try to prevent problems down the road.
Exactly.
So instead of always constantly looking at when the relationship has disintegrated and the problem, to try to create a situation where we're seeing less problems.
Right.
Because everybody knows going into the relationship, going in what their obligations are, what their responsibilities are, and to try to head off at the pass some of those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. We found that very true in working with tenants. We've spent a lot of years with people calling a hotline or coming to our offices, and it's really, by the time they get to us, it's a full-blown mess. And the number of times that I've said to a tenant, if I could have talked to you before you did that for 5 minutes, or if you could have called me yesterday. And the same holds true. It holds true for both parties. So, one of the things that I really like about what we're doing this year is really taking the time to thoughtfully create materials. I think between the materials you already have available and the materials we've had in the past, like our Renting in Vermont handbook, it's not like the information isn't there, but I don't think we would still have this contentious situation if the material was out there correctly and with the right philosophy behind it. Learn what you do.
Right, and it's also identifying some spots where maybe materials can be introduced where they haven't been in the past. So one of the things that we're talking about preparing is a brochure that town health officers could use. So if they go in for an inspection, they can give one to both parties, the tenant and the landlord. It's the same brochure. It has everybody's information on it. It has what everybody's obligations and what they should and shouldn't be doing on it. So to try to dispel some of the myths, but also give some resources to the folks who are out there on the ground, like town health officers, who sometimes don't know what to tell either party.
Right, and town health officers, I will say again and again and again, every chance I get, bless them, they have the most thankless position, I think, of any designated state officials. And a majority of them are volunteers on top of everything else. And it's a really hard situation to be in. So we kind of threw this in to say, let's help them, and they can help us educate them because they're out there in the field doing that. In the same way you're talking about that, we're also talking about flyers that have a very basic bullet point based on our laws. These are the responsibilities legally of a tenant. These are the responsibilities legally of a landlord. And here's to go for help.
Right.
Here's where you can go. And again, all on the same handout.
Right.
So we're going to make a few of those, but we're also going to do some actual classroom work.
Right.
So right now, we're creating a few modules, and where we're going to be looking at having basically classroom materials, teachers' guides, and curriculum and resource guides, and we're going to make them available to DHCD so that when we're done this grant, the hope is your agency will be in a position to look at going out and making these available to people.
Certainly. At the very least, we're definitely eager to have the final digital copies so that we can have everything on our website in perpetuity, or at least for the foreseeable future.
Or until the law changes. Or
Right. And that's a very exciting prospect. And actually, if you don't mind touching on, I'd like to touch on a statement that you made earlier about sort of prospective landlords and the idea of people who are interested in becoming a landlord for one reason or another. Like you said, they've either inherited a property, perhaps they're a first-time home buyer that's looking at a duplex or something along those lines, or even the creation of an accessory dwelling unit. And one of the reasons why our department is particularly excited about this opportunity, this project, is there really isn't a whole lot of sort of soup to nuts basic. Here's what is going to entail being a landlord, and we knowing that there's really tight housing market throughout the state. We're doing a housing needs assessment right now, and all of what we sort of know intuitively is coming out in the numbers that it's really hard to find affordable rental housing in the state. And we're hoping that by having more education materials out there to encourage people to become landlords, or when they're thinking about perhaps downsizing their homes, to be able to be in a landlord situation and do it in a way that's well educated and just is going to lead to a fundamentally better relationship for particularly for folks who are looking at small scale kind of rental situations.
And great point, Shaun. Absolutely, it's certainly part of what we've been thinking, and I think you kind of segued into a point that I think a lot of people who could be a little critical of us suddenly saying, hey, we're going to educate landlords, that it goes even farther than that. And for me, at least, it's, I'm not just the director of Vermont Tenants, I'm a program director of CVOEO. And what we're talking about is affordable housing. And this is what we're experiencing right now, that even though this is a business and it's meant to be a business relationship, very small landlords who don't know their legal responsibilities and rights, or the steps to take when there's problems, or even to understand the warranty of habitability, they're getting sued, their insurance rates are going sky high, they're having, all these kinds of things. And they're doing what, frankly, I would probably do, or you would probably do, throw up their hands and say, this isn't worth it to me. I'm not making any money off this. Only really big, property management companies are actually able to actually look at staying in the black and looking at some kind of income. Really small landlords are just making it through. And so when we have a time where there's such a low vacancy rate for rentals pretty much statewide, and that's indisputable. We hear it all the time. I can't find a place. We just hired a new employee to work in housing assistance. He can't find a place to live. He's moving here from out of state. He can't find a place to live. the more landlords that throw their hands in the air, small landlords, and quit the business, the worse this crisis becomes. And I think it's the right thing to do, to work collaboratively with folks like Angela to say that something has to stop this before there are no more small landlords, because the reality is our homeless population would be insane if we didn't have small landlords. We need to have them. And I think it's an important point that gets missed.
Right.
So
Can't go wrong with education.
yeah, you can never go wrong by learning something.
Right.
Absolutely not. So we're going to create some classes.
Yep.
And part of what we're working on right now is a survey. And we're actually ready to go public with it. So I really wanted to take some time to kind of talk about the creation of it, what our goal behind doing this survey is, because I think some people get surveyed out, especially in your human services. You get surveyed out. Oh, it's a survey. Why this is different for us and why we're wanting input, even critical input, to everybody. You were talking about the stakeholders and that it is more than just landlords and tenants. And when we started looking at a stakeholder list, it was huge. It's not just the ones you mentioned. It's human service agencies. It's the health profession. I mean, it's just people not being in a stable housing situation bleeds out everywhere, and it impacts programs and services everywhere. So we wanted to find a way to get not only the stakeholders' unique perspective, but what their perspective of the other parties' perspective or needs were. So we've designed a survey that allows people to identify their role, or even multiple roles, as a stakeholder, be you a tenant or a police officer or a landlord or, whatever party you're in. And then Angela, you've been doing, the heavy burden of this survey, and it's been amazing trying to work through this process. But talk a little bit about how we're going to be able to get so many different perspectives.
Well, there's some really great survey software out there now, so that's helpful. But one of the things we wanted to look for in this survey is to get a sense of maybe where misinformation is or where misperceptions are, as well as
the myths, Shaun was talking
the
about.
myths
Yeah.
part of it. And we know they're out there, and so we're hoping to be able to track by who people identify themselves as, maybe where some of these myths are coming from, and where we can focus our efforts to really have the most impact. So if we're seeing trends where there's a lot of misunderstanding about, say, the warranty of habitability, we know that we can maybe focus a lot of our educational efforts on that. Or if we have 7 or 8 stakeholder groups that are saying, we need a lot of education about this issue, we know that, yes, that's a gap. I think you and I have a sense of what we think those issues are and where those gaps are, but it'll be interesting to hear from other stakeholder groups.
I think that's going to be a very interesting part of it. We have a pretty good sense. We think we have a pretty good sense.
Right.
But, one of the things that I think is going to really benefit us in being able to create these educational materials is how broad we're looking at it.
Right.
And so warranty of habitability is a great example. And basically that just is it's the laws that cover the condition of a rental unit.
Right.
I think a lot of small landlords don't even know it exists.
Right.
And I know for a fact a lot of tenants don't understand that it exists.
Right, or how it works.
Right, or
practice.
who's responsible for what. I've seen
Right.
tenants sign leases that say they're responsible for all repairs and think, oh, okay, I can do that.
Right.
But by looking at the opposite parties' perspectives. So I think it's going to be really interesting to us if we were to see that if a surprising number of landlords said tenants need education on the
Right.
warranty of habitability. What does
Right.
that mean? We expect tenants are going to say that's a real need for landlords, but we could be very surprised.
Right.
And
We could find out that tenants think landlords need to know what the access statute is, or need
Right.
to know more about retaliation or discrimination.
Right. Right.
That's what we're going to find out.
Right. I think we have an immediate hope for it, which is let's get the right materials to the right places at the right time, and really grateful to be working with DHCD on making that happen. But I think we also have a longer-term hope, that we really truly are hoping that somewhere along the lines enough change will begin to happen by educating new landlords, by I think a lot of small landlords feel like, you know, there are programs like mine that think that all landlords wear horns and, you know, they're all evil and all those kinds of things. And, you know, I've talked to many people who, you know, are looking at buying a place, even my own son when he was looking at a house. And I said, you know, you could always start out with a duplex. Whoa, I don't want to be a landlord. And I'm like, really? And so I'm really hoping we can kind of smooth some of that mess, because I don't think it genuinely comes out of meanness on either party. No. I think it really just comes out of a lack of education.
And also lack of understanding of the other side.
Right.
And what's happening on the other side, or what's supposed to be happening on the other side.
And so kind of one of the last things that I want to throw in is there's a component to this that I want to make sure we at least touch on. So we know that we're targeting looking at making materials under certain categories. Some materials about the actual eviction process and what that looks like. And from my perspective, that's very important for tenants, because I work with so many people that are homeless because the landlord said get out and they went, not understanding that they had a right to a court process.
Right.
I think a lot of small landlords do that and say get out because they don't know. They don't know they have to write a notice or whatever. We're certainly going to talk about basic rights and responsibilities under the law. But one of the components that we want to put in is a little bit about fair housing. And I'm really fortunate. I work with CVOEO. We have a program called the Fair Housing Program, and we're able to hand that piece to them. But I know that it was a big, important piece for DHCD to have in there, and I just was hoping you could talk a little bit about kind of what the impetus behind that is.
Certainly. Well, DHCD, amongst our many things that we're tasked with, one of the major things is to make sure that as a state, we're doing our best to comply with federal and state fair housing laws, so anti-discrimination, and we have a number of reports and programs that we have to report back to Housing and Urban Development on the federal level, but also just generally on a moral level, want to make sure that everybody has access to housing, regardless of the type of population or the type of person that they are. And relatively recently, Vermont Legal Aid came out with a report that shows that, surprisingly enough, there still is quite a bit of discrimination in housing choice, and that particularly amongst those with disabilities and those families with young children. And so, understanding what is the law and what is fair housing and anti-discrimination is really important, not only for residents who are seeking housing, but also for landlords who don't want to be liable for a discrimination suit.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a piece of it too. I think many landlords don't understand the liability in it.
Right.
And I think a lot of small landlords don't understand that they have some exemptions to it in some ways. So they can. So we're really excited to be adding that piece in and doing that too. So I think with the last minute or so we have, what I really want to do is our websites are up right here underneath us. Beginning tomorrow, you're going to be able to go to them and take this landlord education survey that we're talking about. And you don't have to identify yourself as any kind of stakeholder, because basically being human is enough for us in terms of getting the information.
Housing.
We all need housing, exactly. So we really want to encourage everybody to not only take the survey, but to spread the word to other people, because if there's any way possible that we can make any kind of a scratch in that illusion of that power imbalance and help it be a positive working together relationship between the landlord and tenant, this is where it's going to start. And it's a very simple piece, but it's where you start. It's absolutely where you start. So take the survey. Take the time to take the survey. As you can see, it's either cvoeo.org or
VAOA.com
or bzattorneys.com. Can you do it through that
one?
one?
Put it up there too.
That's okay. Anywhere. Google Vermont Tenants. Do whatever you like. But please take the time to go ahead and take the survey. I really want to thank you both very, very much for joining me tonight. It's also always nice to have somebody else explain their perspective. So thank you.
Thanks
you.
for having us.